go ahead and get started. Okay, all right. So yeah, this is the regular temporal meetup. We are at temporal.io. That's why you're already here, but the recordings and any other material will be at temporal.io/YouTube. Sean, I'm head of developer experience, and I tend to run the meetups around here. And so this is a brief agenda for today. We're going to go through some update items for people that are interested in what we've been up to. Just a subset. I mean, I just threw a bunch of things together yesterday. Then we'll have a presentation from Drew. Then we'll talk a little bit about the feature mapping process. And this will be an introductory level-ish talk for people who might want to have an overview of Temporal's features. And then we'll have a second anniversary Q&A because this month we celebrated our second anniversary. That's the rough shape of the day. And we're just gonna get right into it. Last time we talked a little bit about the workshops that we're gonna do. So I don't have them to share yet. We recorded a Go workshop in August, and then we recorded a Java workshop in September. I think it went really well. Sorry. We recorded it in September, and then we recorded Java workshop in October. I think we're probably going to do one a month. Next month, we're probably going to do the TypeScript workshop, hopefully with a live beta. So if you want a long form introduction to Temporal, people are having really positive reactions to it. And our Java workshop will be up on YouTube within this week. So looking forward to that as well. And yeah, so this is a safe place for people to ask all your beginner questions, and we'll sit with you as long as it takes to get you comfortable with Temporal. Next, we have a little update on Temporal Web. I know a lot of people are waiting on this. There's a lot of work in progress. It's been open source from the beginning. So you just hit to temporal.io/UI. But the news actually is now that we have a Docker Compose file with all the stuff in it. So highly recommend checking it out. I do see, okay, cool. A few more, we have a lot of jobs piling up. So for those who don't know, we have a job board, not for working for Temporal, but working with Temporal with other companies. And something that's pretty cool to see actually is that people are starting to list Temporal as part of their job descriptions. So there is Temporal in a bunch of places. Airbyte, a previous speaker and the case study partner of ours, Fronted, which is a new fintech startup in the UK, and of course Stripe, which you're going to hear from later. So thanks for that. Thanks, Mina. Yes. All right. There's some links in the chat. So with that, I think we're going to hand over to Drew. If you're ready to take over, Drew.
Hi.
Hey, morning.
Project. Good morning, everyone. Give me a second to wrangle both Zoom and Google Slides at the same time.
I like how you have the gamer set up with the microphone just.
Oh yeah, Jabra Link 370. If anybody wants to know. You guys seeing a slides or something else? Let's see.
It's just kicking off. Is it live for anyone? It just says started screen sharing.
Yeah, it just looks blank.
Okay. How's this?
Oh, yep.
Okay. Hi. Okay. So I'm Drew. I'm from Stripe. We're building a platform with Temporal, which is a little different than I think what a lot of teams are doing, where they're just building for a single product team. And so I just wanted to talk through like our experience with that and the approach we've been taking. I think it'll be hopefully useful to other folks. So I'll just give you some context, and I'll talk about how like we give out service, like how teams divide up service ownership for the worker services that we're building on Temporal. I'll talk about our fat client strategy, and then some of the protections that we've given our diverse user base against like foot guns. So let's get going. We have a large engineering org, and we have 3 different languages that they use: Ruby, Java, and Go. We want to support all of them. we're building this as a platform for a lot of different teams. From control plane use cases range from control planes to like money movement to like billing subscription management. Just like to frame all of this, you probably, if you know anything about Stripe, you probably aren't surprised to know that reliability is like our #1 issue. I'm ex-Facebook, and I always say that like privacy is to Facebook as reliability is to Stripe. And so we need we need these workflows that people are writing to be very robust. Okay, so we have distributed ownership of Temporal. So as you might guess, we own the servers. We have 2 servers. One is for our infrastructure use cases and one for product use cases. But otherwise, the servers will share many use cases. We are relying on Temporal's horizontal scalability and isolation to do this. We did want, however, to isolate infrastructure use cases from any production problems that people might have. Anything a product team might do, we wanted to make sure our control planes could still run independently of that. And then we asked teams to set up a worker service for to run their workflows per on-call rotation, basically. And for us, given the sort of cost of service ownership at Stripe, we're not a microservices company. We're more of a services, medium to large services company. And we think that, and we find that there's a bit of too much overhead for people to adopt the workflow engine if they have to set up a service for every workflow. So we ask them to just sort of have a team or a product area own a workflow, and that ends up being like an on-call rotation that can get paged. And then we try to just lower the cost of service ownership by providing them like dashboards and metrics out of the box. So all the stuff that you'll see, we picked some of the metrics from the Cadence operation guide, and just like implemented some of those, and then like give them to teams and give pages and other dashboards to them. Okay, so we completely wrapped the Temporal SDK and hid it from our customers. We've done this in both Java and in Ruby. And the reason for this is we are not in a position where we as a team can build up a bunch of institutional knowledge of Temporal and like just know to avoid those things. We have a lot of different teams starting to use and the workflow engine, and we expect tens to hundreds of teams to ultimately use it. And so they don't, there's going to be new employees, and even we find ourselves like falling victim to versioning issues, even though we're experienced with the framework. So, for example, like in Ruby, our client adds sorbet types, which is basically, if you don't know what sorbet is, TypeScript is to JavaScript as sorbet is to Ruby, as hack is to PHP. So we get static types, yay. By the way, if anybody on the call is using sorbet, we'd love to like connect with you. The focus of our Fat client is on productivity and safety. In this talk, I'm just going to talk about some of the safety stuff that we've done. So we want to protect our users against classic blunders. We actually have a document called classic blunders, workflow engine classic blunders, that like aggregates the sort of most commonly seen pitfalls. So the most well-known classic blunder is idempotency of activities, or non-idempotency of activities, I should say. So we think that activities should be opinionated about what the retry policies that are possible with them are. So if you don't know, Temporal will run an activity, it'll attempt once, or it will retry and run it multiple times, and it cannot guarantee exactly once semantics. So we force people writing activities to choose which one they are. And the nice thing about this is, in addition to sort of getting them to think about idempotency, which they don't necessarily do naturally, we can actually call their bluff. And if they mark an activity as execute at least once, then we're going to run it twice in our test framework, compare the results or compare the errors and make sure that they match. And this definitely, like, it's very early. Like we just rolled this out recently, but it's already catching things. So this is something I would recommend if you have the resources to sort of like test for idempotency. Okay, next, replay safety. So as many of you probably know, workflows, when they execute, they can restart from the beginning, and they retrace the history of the execution. And that new execution must match the old. In other words, like the workflow must be pure. It can't have side effects. It can't have randomness. So there's a few ways this can manifest. One is they could be using improperly things like sleep or logging that would happen twice. Also, sleep is, using the default sleep is bad because it's gonna like hard block, whereas temporal sleep will like defer execution, which is what you want. And so we basically we use Rubocop in Ruby and error-prone in Java to detect statically any calls to like just a fairly long list of functions. This is an example of an error-prone check. And then you can see here that we direct them to our classic blunders doc. We're thinking of open sourcing these rules, so please reach out to us if that's something that you'd be interested in Ruby or Java. And we want to see if there's would be demand for it. It's not perfect. It can't detect calls inside of functions that are called from workflows, but it's still like it still catches a large percentage of these problems. Another thing we do in Ruby is we do network fencing. So we prevent all network calls from within workflows. We're able to do this because we already have an enforcement layer that all network calls go through in our Ruby code base. And basically, we just set a thread local, which just says like network calls aren't allowed, and we give it a good error message if one uses. And we do this. We're about to roll this out in production, so we have our fingers crossed. No, I mean yeah. I think it's going to be good. But this is the thing we use to prevent Mongo, Redis access and so forth. This one's a little trickier to understand, but many of you may be familiar with basic versioning. So like if you are adding a field to a gRPC interface, you shouldn't add a required field because clients may not be passing in that field yet. We go a step further and we force people to add version their field. So if you're adding a new field, you have to declare a version along with it. And then we use that extra data to just guide more checking to make sure people aren't doing bad things. So in Temporal, whenever you add an activity call to an execution, you should put that under a version check, because if you don't, it's going to be like the replay history, the history replay will change, and Temporal won't be able to tell whether you're just like have some randomness or like impurity in your thing, or you've deployed new code in the middle of a workflow execution. And we found it difficult to kind of tell people about our versioning system. We don't want to like force them to use it when they create a workflow, but we want them to find it. And so forcing them to like note, hey, we've got versioning from within, like when they add a new argument, we say, you must version this argument. And then if they access the argument and they're still in a version 1 workflow, in this case, we're going to raise an error and say, oh, you've accessed a new field that's only available in version 2 and version 1. And we think this will, we haven't rolled this out yet, but we think this will prevent them from making a lot of common versioning errors that will then cause them to get non-determinacy errors in production. So just like that was it. So in summary, we'd love to share what we've done with you, either just like ideas or code. We already are contributing to some of the repos. just like note down my information and reach out if you want to chat. And as Sean said, we're hiring, so shameless plug for coming to work with us.
So Drew, my question is that, like, obviously Temporal has changed the way that you're literally writing your application code, but have you noticed any ways that it's changed the way that you actually like look at software and collaborate with your teammates and sort of like go about the whole process of software development?
We we actually just had a summit trying to think through like what would Stripe be like if in a world where people hadn't just said, okay, we're going to replace this thing with a workflow, or write this new thing with a workflow, with like the next, what you're asking is like, what's the next step? How does it change the way we think about software? And I would say we haven't seen anything in practice yet because we're still really early in our ramp. But we have this concept at Stripe we call cluster flows, which are collections of like cron jobs or streaming event consumers that interact spookily with each other. Like cron A will like set some state in the database, and then cron B will run periodically and like check to see if that state has triggered, and then cron C. And so then teams like hate these cluster flows because they're impossible to debug. And so one of the things that we're teaching teams is like, you can manage the whole life cycle of a business process in Temporal and debug exactly where you are in that process and unify it under one umbrella. And teams are not necessarily like, their default is to think, let me just sort of replace the things I have today with a workflow. And so like that paradigm shift is still kind of, I think, taking root.
Very cool. So basically the idea that instead with most software infrastructure products, it's like one component that you have to tie together with a bunch of the other things that you have. And Temporal is more of the thing that's doing the tying together and kind of giving you a holistic view. Very cool.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Sean, I think if people have questions, it's a good time.
Yeah, we have some questions from the viewers. Shannon, actually, if you want to come on, just ask your question.
Yeah, I mean, it's super interesting that you guys test for item potency. I'd love to understand like how you assert the test is item potent. Is there like a row that you check, or how do you like do this amongst like all the different test cases?
Yep. So because we have a fat client, we actually just like intercept the call to the activity, and we like literally just run it twice in a row. In our integration test, and then we keep the result from the first one and we compare the two results.
Oh, I see. Got it. Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think Jacob was asking if you mock it or is it end to end. I think you mock it. It sounds like.
So these tests are using. So we brought over. One thing I didn't mention is we use so Java SDK provides a integration test service. We brought that, we put that into a container and brought it over so that we could use it from Ruby. And so we use that. And so it's using like a full-ish fledged like execution. And then, so these are both, we do this in both end-to-end and integration tests, meaning what we call integration tests are using like fake Mongo, and people are like stubbing some of their service calls in those tests. We also do it in tests where people aren't doing any stubbing.
Got it. I think Jacob actually had some questions. Jacob, you want to come on and ask about the dependencies?
The activity item potency tests sound really interesting. We would love to do similar stuff, but yeah, I was just wondering about how much you mock those out, because I imagine some item potency things arise from actually talking to real services.
So that's right. So again, so because of we do like, we encourage people to write like at least one end-to-end test. Our plan is right now to like run those end-to-end tests on a cron job, which is also a workflow. We haven't quite gotten there yet. And then on the integration test side, what happens if they're stubbing a thing? is they'll do a .1, like a expect blah, blah, blah. In Ruby, it's like expect such and such function to be called once. And it's called twice. And they're like, what's going on? I called it once. And they may not even know that we're doing idempotency testing. And so we log a message to tell them we're doing it. I'm still actually working through what I want to do is stub the stubbing and tell them, hey, this is failing in this way because, we're doing idempotency testing. And even that, even though they're not actually testing this like remote service call, even that is like helpful because it's telling them like, think about idempotency of this service that you're calling. But obviously, the other thing that we think some of our network interfaces don't do stubbing, and they do actually have like real fake services that can detect that will, like our Mongo integration, for example, an integration test is a legit like it's doing writes locally to I think SQLite or I don't know, some sort of local storage, and it does detect idempotency issues. And that's for us, that's a really big one. So just like the database alone gives us a lot.
Have you considered doing sort of like a form of chaos testing in production where you just execute an activity multiple times?
We're very excited about that. We haven't done it yet.
Cool.
Yeah, we also want to inject faults and just, yeah. What we're thinking of doing is like, the problem is we have a bunch of people whose workflows are not very, they're just like relatively minor things that don't affect their like internal tools and stuff to like send Slack messages and stuff. And we don't want to subject everyone to all of these things. It may increase the cost of building workflows. And so what we're thinking of doing is having like 2 reliability tiers of workflows and saying, you can use tier 1 or 2. And if you're tier 1, we're gonna do all the things to your workflow to make sure that it's solid. But we haven't done that yet.
Drew, if I can comment, it's similar ideologically to what you guys did with the Java client that you built, right? Where you can be very explicit with the guarantees that you want when you invoke an activity. It's the same thing, but kind of across the board, where it's like, it's not that you always want perfect guarantees all the time. It's that you want to be very explicit and choose your guarantees for every situation that you're in. That's
right. We have another, we try to capture intent as much as we can from our developers. So what we have here is basically we say, you may know that Temporal has like different policies for mutual exclusion. So I can only ever complete this workflow once, or I can only be successful with it once. And we give them a way to very easily like pick one of those strategies, and then they pick the arguments that they are computing the workflow ID on if they're guaranteeing, if they want it to be mutually exclusive with others with that exact key. So we just make it really easy for them to just like declaratively specify what's going on. And then from that, we can infer a bunch of things and put in more checks. So I think like the message I would relay here in both the idempotency case and the mutual exclusion case, and really a bunch of others, another thing we do is we force them to specify an SLA, which is like, after how long would you like to be notified if this workflow were to fail? And then from that, we can build monitoring, we can build metrics, we can build dashboards and other things that sort of derive from the data that they're giving us. They also tell us whether they're manually executing the workflows or automatically running them. And that tells us whether or not to care about an SLA. So basically, we're just trying to capture as much intent as we can to inform heuristic choices that we will make.
Awesome. We have a couple of higher level questions and then one follow-up on your on network fencing. So we should probably have dealt with this at the beginning. So Shannon from Bolt asks, how did you come across Temporal, and how did you decide to introduce it to Stripe?
Word of mouth. We had some ex-Uber folks, and they were familiar with Cadence. We also had some people come over from Oracle who were like, why doesn't Stripe have a workflow engine? And Temporal was getting a lot of buzz at the time and was seemed to be well regarded. And then we talked to Coinbase about using it in Ruby, and they were very bullish on it.
Got it. And do you wrap Coinbase Ruby or?
Yeah, we wrap it completely. Yeah, we also contribute to it, but we wrap it in the sorbet type safe layer, and we hide it completely.
Is that one of the things that you're considering open sourcing as well?
Potentially, if we don't know how much like buy-in for sorbet there is in the community, but if there were demand, we would definitely consider it.
I mean, if it's anything like TypeScript, I think it'll be pretty popular. So it definitely had a slow start for TypeScript, but I think now it's definitely taken over the ecosystem.
Yeah, that would be great. I think there's this whole class of languages that went through this transition, and Ruby is maybe a little bit younger in its transition, but all these companies are growing up and realizing they need strong types.
Growing up, exactly.
Static typing, yeah.
All right, so one more specific question on one of your use cases, which is network fencing. Sudhir, you want to come ask your question actually?
Yeah. Hey. So I just wanted to know most of your activities, at least some of the workflow orchestrations we have involved some kind of network activity. So what does it mean to prevent all this database access? Is that so that your workflows are more idempotent, or I didn't really get the whole.
Oh, sure. Yeah, absolutely. So so when you're writing a workflow, people should be doing all of their network calls from within activities. And the reason for that is because network calls generally can fail, and workflows themselves don't have like well, you could add retry policies to your workflow, but because workflows can fail, network calls can fail, and also they don't tend to be idempotent. They're not pure in the sense that they might return a different result the second time you call them from the first time. And so all that kind of stuff you should be doing in activities. And then the situation, the framework will memoize the result of the activity.
Got it. Okay.
And so it's just pushing it out from, a lot of people just like their naive thing is they write a workflow and then they just start typing, and they're like, they don't necessarily know what this whole activity thing is yet. We saw one PR come up where the person put a big side effect block in the workflow, and then they just did their whole thing inside of that. And so, yeah, people don't know this, and so we're just kind of guiding them to do the right things.
Awesome. So I think that was a wonderful Q&A and presentation. Thanks so much, Drew, for sharing this with us. Yeah, hopefully people are inspired. If you're interested in providing Temporal as a service in the company, I think Drew and his whole team have a lot of experience. It looks like they're hanging out in the chat here, and also they're in Slack if you want to ping them for that. All right, thanks, Drew.
Thanks, everybody. This was fun.
Yeah, round of applause in the chat for Drew. Always like that. It's a little corny, but it's nice to see like a stream of claps. So I'm gonna emoji it. Meanwhile, I'm gonna talk a little bit about the feature map. So this is a little bit for the newer people in the group who might be newer to Temporal. And it's a project that I've been kind of working on and off for the past maybe 3-4 months. It's a work in progress. It's not final. Covers the work of many people, and this is just one person's presentation about it. And your ideas are welcome. This is partially us open sourcing how we think about Temporal to you to see if it's a useful mental model. Okay, so the problem really comes down to how long does it take to learn Temporal? What is probably a realistic answer is years, but what we're trying to get it down to is days. And that's the crux of the problem that I've been facing ever since joining Temporal and trying to do my job. So I'll give you some context, which is I actually went back. So we have our docs hosted on Netlify, which is coincidentally where I used to work. And on Netlify, every past version of the docs persist. So I went through all the way back to version 0.26. And this is the original first public version of our docs that we forked from Cadence. And yeah, this is, if I read through all this, maybe I've learned Temporal. I'm not sure. So if you look at the sidebar as a guide, you can see like glossary, workflows, activities, events, queries, task queues, configuration, whatever. And oh, there's this little Java SDK thing here. Maybe if I unfold that, okay, maybe there's a little bit more about how to write workflows in Java. So have I learned Temporal if I read all of this? Well, there's a Go SDK, and the Go SDK covers more stuff that isn't covered in anywhere else in the other parts of the docs. And then I found there's a little glossary that gives me a bunch more information and definition of terms. And at this point, I'm kind of a little lost already. So I kind of break down how long it takes to learn Temporal, which into like, all right, let's just kind of back up a little bit. What features does Temporal have? And I think if we just have a straight list, it might help people to understand like what Temporal offers, but also figure out what to learn. So in what order should you learn them? And then we have a third question I'll cover briefly at the end. And my solution to this was actually just to draw a map, because we have essentially like as long as we know the rough shape of everything, then we can start planning our routes. Let's say I have one team that wants to separate things out into categories, they can do that. Or if another team that wants to highlight the different landmarks, they can do that. Or if another team that wants to chart journeys between different places, they can do that. But they all have different roles and responsibilities, but they have all the same mental map of what Temporal is. So that's the analogy that we're trying to go after. The process that we kind of felt our way towards was a 5-step process, which is taking an inventory, identifying core features, defining and tagging everything, grouping them, and then drawing journeys. We are not done yet. Like I said, this is a work in progress. We're kind of here-ish. We've started to dabble a little bit in the later stages, but I just wanted to show you this is kind of what it's like, and hopefully we're making it easier for you to learn Temporal as well as and evangelize it internally within your own teams. What is a feature? I went to dictionary.com. Dictionary.com says a prominent or conspicuous part or something offered as a special attraction. The difference between a feature and benefit. This one's from aha.io. I like this because it links it to a benefit. And you can see that every feature or every product has a parallel benefit. And sometimes you want the benefit. Sometimes you're just like, all right, stop selling me the marketing fluff and get me the features. So it's useful to have both side by side. And that's actually what we're going to be doing later as well. For me, here are other requirements that I just threw up as well. It should be distinct from each other. So we're trying to find the eigen feature, which is like separable from others. We should have some formal definitions. So we should, even though if it might be a typical English word, if we capitalize it, it might be a specially defined word for Temporal, and we would just have a consistent usage throughout the system. It should be top level-ish, so it should not be too low level. And this is a judgment call, more of a marketing term, because there are some things that are definite subsets of the others, but we want to feature them. And finally, they should be user-facing, so not that much implementation detail. So one way to do it is to go through the source code and understand all the APIs. So here's our gAPC. We can look at all the commands. We can look at all the history events. But that's a little bit too low level, right? Like, I don't really care that. I mean, all this is essentially one feature, which is workflows can start and end. So maybe probably the best way that we started was looking at SDKs and SDK features. So here we start to see a little bit of like, okay, like we have all these in Go, we have all these in Java. Some of these are Java specific, some of these are Go specific. Let's understand if we need to normalize across them. Let's understand if we covered them in the docs. Let's understand if we should elevate some of them or de-emphasize others. So what is a core feature, right? Having listed all these features, it's not really helpful because I'm not going to remember all of these off the bat. Nobody has time to go across them in not even like the first hour or two of experiencing Temporal. But what is core is really something that is so fundamental that we say, like, if you don't know this, you don't know Temporal, right? Like it just is so core to to the concept itself that you have to know about it before you walk away. If there are too many core features, if all of these are core features, then nothing's core. You know, the various Incredibles like syndrome philosophy. And if there are too few features, then it's a bit trivial in a sense that it's a very over-engineered way to say hello world. So we have to trade off parsimony, pedagogy, and persuasion. I like the alliterations there. But essentially, we're trying to persuade you to use temporal by if I just show you the core, you should be persuaded. Pedagogy, like it should be able to teach it to you within some reasonable time frame. And parsimony, like how much of that can I take out without removing anything fundamental. So where we're at, and this is still moving, by the way, it's a moving target. Our core features, that's why I put it in quotes, because it's still a moving target, is that we have workflows, activities, workflow APIs, which I'll go into, workers, clients, and Web UI TCTL. So 6 items. And I know that it roughly takes about 30 to 40 minutes to teach those because I've done it. And this is a unreleased video, but essentially I've been going through some tutorials on like, okay, how can we cover these in some amount of detail and actually explain each of these so that you come away watching a 30-minute video, just understanding the core temporal. Once you have the core, so how long does it take? Let's try to answer that. Probably reading, you're kind of skimming, and reading speeds are faster, so about 10 minutes. Edit a video, about 30 minutes. And live workshop, this is what we've been doing with Go and Java so far. We know it's about 2 to 3 hours because there's live Q&A and live code and questions. But yeah, these are all the fidelity. This is the fidelity that we're trying to go for right now. And let me know if you have a different opinion, or let me know if you think it can be done a different way. Max Bovikin says, one doesn't learn by reading. Smiley face. Sure, yeah, a lot of times like you're just kind of glazing over the words and the code, but at least conceptually, hopefully you understand like what each of these are if I give you a 1-sentence definition of each of those. Okay,
yeah,
so
Sean, it would be interesting at some point to understand how many minutes of actual coding does it take, right? Because like I think at the end of the day, a lot of people, they can't learn it until they actually do it in practice.
Well, live workshop is all live coded. So if you code along with us, that would give you the upper bound because the people running the workshops are temporal experts, right? So you'll probably be a little bit slower.
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so if you have the core, so how long does it take to learn the core? And then how long does it take to learn all of temporal? Just being ambitious. Mina in the chat, Mina is one of our design partners. He says, it actually took me over a week to grasp those core features. So we're trying to get that down, and with your help and with your feedback, hopefully we'll get there. So this is an ambitious job because Temporal is a huge code base, has a lot of history. And to give you some security about what all of Temporal is, we actually just went through and inventoried all the features. So here's the feature versus benefit column, and it kind of spans across 2 columns. Again, I want to stress that this is not final. It's a work in progress. We're just showing you what we've done so far. But I think it's useful to have like a 1 to 2 word thing of like, okay, why do you care about heartbeats? Oh, if you want a faster timeout, if something's unresponsive, something like that, and again, like I haven't like this is actually my own notes, so I haven't approved this with like founders. Probably there are a lot of mistakes in here, but I just want to give you an idea of like this is the process, right? Like let's just inventory a list of all the top level features, and now you have a map, right? There's nothing that's in Temporal that's not in here. That's actually a really good guarantee to have. If I have captured everything. Then I've also tagged everything. So we have core, but okay, so then it's easy. We had a lot of debates over like, okay, should we like all this be advanced or whatever? But you can actually see like, okay, some parts are to deal with security. Some parts are what I call control flow. Like it gives you some power to guide business logic. And some of them will overlap, right? This is both a control flow. Let's see, what's a good example of overlap? Some for maintenance, some for security. I don't know. I just like just threw everything up there in terms of tags, and we see what sticks. Thanks for the comments, everyone. Actually, so all right, I actually have even more. So you start to see how we approach this in the docs. This is not launched yet, but you can actually see this in the docs. If you do Command K and search. And you just type what is a something, you probably will see something pop up. And that's due to the hard work of Cully and Dale, who've been leading this definition effort. But just from a core understanding of here's our feature set, let's define everything, let's say why, let's say when, let's say how, and really make sure that we cover everything that you need in Temporal. Then we actually group tags, because the other thing, the problem with other tags is that you have limited memory space. So I want to give you like, a small subset of tags that you can actually use to code to categorize everything. And I actually had a really good call with Dominic, where we actually ended up putting everything on a 2x2 matrix, and saying like, okay, this is closer to user facing, this is closer to operator facing, this is closer to code, and whereas this is closer to config. And you just like spew everything out here. I don't expect you to read all this. I'll share the slides later on. But this is just like the starting of a map, of starting to say like, this testing code is probably closer to the other workflow code than versioning or logging or persistence, right? There's some sense of distance. There's some sense of like, okay, if you should start at the core, at the center, that's a core API, and then you can branch out as you see fit, because we show you the overall direction. So let's simplify, right? I always want to simplify. You cannot remember 30-something features, but you can remember there's core APIs, and then there's some directions that you can go into. So we care, like Temporal cares about security. Temporal cares about maintenance. Temporal cares about getting you into production and scaling. And also we have a lot of non-core APIs. And I didn't know where to stick the experimental features, so I kind of stuck it in here just because mostly they're parts of the server. So yeah, those are our neighborhoods, right? And should security be so high up in its own category? Maybe not, maybe not, So, and then you can, from there, you can start to draw a learning journey. So if you're a developer, you care about core APIs and what can I do with them? So you start here, go here, and then you're like, oh, maybe I should, like, make sure that it's secure. And then maybe I should get things into production, and maybe I should think about migration. If you're a platform team, if you're hosting a Temporal for other teams in your company, maybe you just have a core knowledge of Temporal, and then you want to learn everything you can about architecture and production, and you want to help them with their scaling. So this is just one example, but it's just I wanted to give you an example. Here's how we're dealing with this in the TypeScript SDK. So you can see that we're actually categorizing each of these, so you understand, right? All right, I just have 15 minutes to learn Temporal. I'm just going to read through these 4 documents, and we are giving you an implicit guarantee that you will know Temporal with these 4 things. It's not complete, but you'll know the core. And before you go to production, hey, think through all these 4 things. And hey, if you want to do some advanced stuff, here's all the stuff that we couldn't fit. And then we're also starting to branch out into tutorials. So start here, go here, and don't forget deploying and production. So how long does it take to learn Temporal? We have a rough list of features and some advanced APIs. In what order should you learn them? Start from the core, and then where you figure out where you want to go. And then a secret third question, which is how can we identify product opportunities? Because we can actually see like there's some parts of it where we're heavy and some parts where we're not. But also, actually, more importantly, every time we add a new feature, we have to figure out how it interfaces with all the other existing features and make sure that we've thought through the API and we thought through any edge cases that might crop up. So I think it's very helpful for us, and I just wanted to share that how this is the process that we've been thinking. So I don't think I have any time for questions, but I'm happy to take questions in the chat. If Maxim and Samar are ready, and Ryland, I think you're the host for this section, we can go to the founder Q&A.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Yeah, we are ready.
Awesome. So I have some kind of high-level questions prepared for Max and Samar. And if we have time, I think we would love to answer some questions from the chat. So please start putting those in there, and we will do our best to get to them. So I figure Max and Samar, maybe the best way to start it is just by giving everyone some context and kind of illuminating everyone about the journey that it took to reach, actually working and founding Temporal. From the point where you started at Simple Workflow like over a decade ago, building something very similar conceptually to the technology that we're still looking at today.
I think the good question is like how we got here where we are. And I think the most important part of that is that it wasn't just over like very quick journey. I joined Amazon in 2002 for the first time, and I quickly moved to the infrastructure team. It actually was called SPLAT, Software Platform. And obviously AWS didn't exist back then. And one of the things my team owned was the whole PubSub infrastructure of Amazon. And Amazon moved to the it's called microservice these days. Back then it was service-oriented architecture, and was one of the first companies implementing services at scale. And most of the backend was using queues to communicate. And we quickly learned that just using this kind of just queues databases and to create these complex flows, and Amazon has extremely complex flows at the backend, wasn't really scalable. And one of the things which our team kind of decided to do is just implement a very general workflow engine. And result of that effort was a simple workflow service. One thing which is not very well known is that the public version of the simple workflow service is actually a third version. There were two internal versions first, and I was tech lead for the public release, like the public release. But it took us quite a few iterations. And the first version didn't have any SDK. It was practically, okay, here's the history, here's the how you send commands back, and program it yourself. It was kind of similar to programming Windows event loop. And then was a version kind of more similar to step functions, which I wrote, which was practically creating this abstract syntax tree in Java directly from the code. And then like one of a few iterations, we came up with the AWS Flow framework, which is kind of similar to what we are going right now, just fully asynchronous Java programming framework. And then I think this is where simple workflow still is. But Samar, who worked with me on that framework, later came to Microsoft, and he probably could tell his part of the story.
Yeah. So yeah, I joined AWS back in 2010. That's where I met Max for the first time. So like, and since then I've been kind of addicted to this new way of building applications, and one shape or another, I've been kind of continuing the journey that basically I started back in 2010 when I joined the Simple Workflow team. So in 2012, after shipping Simple Workflow, like the public version of it, I actually ended up coming back to Microsoft Azure side of things this time. So I saw this similar gap that engineers at Microsoft were still using these low-level primitives like queues, databases, retry mechanisms, durable timers to build resiliency into their applications. So I started this open source library by the name of Durable Task Framework. One of the learning from Simple Workflow days was I felt we did a decent job on the service side of things, the backend, but I don't think we hit we were able to provide a decent developer experience. And so that's why in 2012, like one of the core things I was focusing on was, let's try to see what kind of developer experience we can provide with C# or .NET. And C# back then introduced async await functionality, sounded like an amazing fit for the class of problems that we were trying to solve with Simple Workflow and like these long-running asynchronous applications, which requires reliability. So I basically did a POC. Actually, it was a hackathon project, which actually like picked up momentum organically, and where more and more teams within Microsoft start relying on Durable Task Framework for their different needs of all the kind of problems they were running into. Then eventually looks like now Azure Functions team is taking a dependency on it to build now what they're calling as Azure Durable Functions. So that was Max, that was the Microsoft part of our journey.
Yeah. Now the join for Cadence.
Yes.
Yeah, and then actually by coincidence, both of us joined Uber in 2015. Was it 15? Yeah, and we worked on first project was Jeremy, which was a messaging system because Uber wanted to build their own messaging system because they had issues with Kafka. And we actually built it, but this time this project kind of was winded down because Kafka actually became much better, and we just focused on something else, and we focused on Cadence. And Cadence was initially just our attempt to do some background jobs for Jeremy. But at the end, we built it, and an interesting thing is that it was, we kind of had a pact with Samar, is that when he said, oh, I want to build workflow engine, I said, no, I don't like simple workflow design. I have so many ideas how to do it differently. And let's just do it completely differently. And Samar came to me and said, like, we don't have funding, we don't have resources. If we are going that route, we never will have something. And we kind of agreed that we will just kind of try to implement based on the same ideas of the simple workflow. Obviously, it's completely different software stack, but ideas kind of high level were the same. And then we will kind of iterate on that. And this strategy worked pretty well because we've got the first version of that pretty out, actually not that fast. Having that we had fight all sort of technical, it took us almost half a year to get the first version to production. But after that, it was pretty smooth sailing with Cadence. And within Uber, it grew like to over 100 use cases organically within 3 years. And that was open source from the beginning because it started to pick up external adoption. And you know the list of companies, some of them are publicly on our website, which became like our users, like HashiCorp, for example, was one of the first ones. And we actually started to get VC interest. Like we just, they contacted us and said, like, you have this project, there is pretty good adoption, and why don't start the company? And our first reaction was, no, why? Like, we are fine at Uber, everything is good. We are getting pretty good paychecks. Uber is just went public, and I actually got a promotion. So it was all good. And but then we kind of started to think about it and realized that we never would be able to achieve the full potential of the technology staying at Uber. The most important thing is we would never be able to have a hosted service. And a lot of companies just people want hosted services because they want to run these clusters themselves. And then we cannot focus on external users. For example, we cannot have Node.js SDK. We cannot have invest in things like Ruby and like all the other languages because Uber standardizes only on Java and Go. And and there are all sorts of other things. And just that, and we also cannot have like that many resources. Nobody would give me 100 people team to work on Cadence. And at the same time, obviously, right now with VC money, we can actually have we can have build real company with like a lot of. We're already 45 people, or even more. So I think we will keep growing, and just amount of talent we can put on to improve this technology and move this open source technology forward is just it's just very good.
Did you expect when I know you obviously created Cadence as an open source project, but did you have expectations that you would get companies like DoorDash and HashiCorp to run on it in addition to Uber when you first did that?
Okay, I always believed in the power of this technology since the simple workflow days, because simple workflow got actually very wide adoption inside of Amazon when we were there. It was very successful inside. Outside, it never picked up, mostly because of the developer experience, and also not being open source. I think there are multiple things which came up, like why Cadence became successful then late Temporal is first, it's open source. Second, I think we finally more or less understood how to do right developer experience in terms of programming model. It's a long way to go to be perfect, but still, I think it's reasonable right now. And then we ran into Uber, it's a large scale. So people trusted us with their workloads. But to tell the truth, type of companies and type of use cases people put it use it for, it was a surprise to me. I thought it would be much let's say, wouldn't be as fast, right? Like our adoption certainly, we are not like ubiquitous technology yet. Our goal to become ubiquitous and everybody like in the industry know and use us, but still where we are right now is certainly happened much faster than we expected.
Very cool.
People like most amazing thing that people started to use us for, not just for fringe use cases, but like for core business use cases. And when we see these amazing companies running their core business use cases on this technology, certainly something which makes us very proud and happy.
It definitely does. So changing pace a bit, like going into the period now where, Temporal, you founded it as a company. I think one thing I'm interested in, and maybe you'll both have different answers here, is, what part of company building, like maybe one part, did you underestimate the difficulty of going in? Because obviously you were doing primarily engineering work for most of your career up until the point where, Temporal was founded. So like, what was one thing you just never could have expected how hard it would be?
Building the team was hard. Just just hiring people for startup, and especially initially, just because we were kind of unknown people, unknown startup. Yes, it was an open source technology, but still. And one thing we did, we said we are going to hire only in Seattle because we didn't want to go remote, because we always worked in big enterprise companies. And it took us quite a while. We only opened for remote hiring just beginning this year. And until then, we had very hard time hiring people and just learning that. Like we actually, right now, Temporal has how many, like 5 people full-time just working on recruiting. just because until we actually built this recruiting machine, we weren't able. Right now, we can absolutely we managed to build a very high quality team, but it was a pretty significant effort. I think that was the hardest. But I think the rest, just like they say, startups are hard until you find the product market fit. And I believe with Temporal, we had product market fit before we started the company. So like the most hardest part of the startup was already solved for us. So it wasn't like as hard as like I think a lot of other startups.
Samar, what's your take?
Yeah, so recruiting, definitely agree with Max. Recruiting was definitely hard. Like both, by the way, me and Max have been heavily involved in recruiting in our previous lives in previous companies, but mostly around interviewing and things like those. Like even at Uber alone, probably in my 4 years over there, probably interviewed more than 300 people. But what I quickly realized is that is just tip of the iceberg. There is an entire machine that goes in to kind of before getting candidates to the recruiting phase. Building that machine was definitely like one of the initial challenges that we ran into. One of the things that I would also add is early days, figuring out this rhythm of releases and expectation was funny. I think Ryland keeps on telling this funny story that when Ryland joined the company, Ryland would say, "Oh, we are working on V1 release of Temporal." He talked to me and I said, "Oh yeah, May we would have a V1 release." Then May happened, no V1 release. And then Ryland asked me, "Samar, what's going on?" "Oh yeah, we will have a V1 release in July." And then around end of June, Ryland started getting worried. "Samar, like July is happening. Like when are we going to have a V1 release?" Then, okay, we had a serious conversation, and then Ryland quickly figured out the way we used to plan was, oh, pick a date which is far enough, and yes, we will get there. So I think from starting the company to where we are now, where we are on a pretty like monthly cadence of doing releases for our server and SDK, having features. There are certain features that we marked as experimental, which are now out there as like production ready, and then building this thing, rhythm was also like one of the key challenges that we ran into. But one thing that like we never compromised on throughout the lifetime of the company is quality. Yes, because we are in the business of selling reliability. One of the things we know we cannot compromise on is messing up the reliability part of Temporal. So that was, I would say, another challenge that we had to figure out and learn along the way.
Absolutely. And I know we're over time, but I think I want to take a few more questions just because it's, I think, a special occasion. The first one is for you, Samar, which is it's a bit of a cheeky one. 10 years ago, when you're working on the SWF team, if I told you that, today Max would be talking about sales projections and quarterly earnings and, accounting, would you believe me?
I would say get out of this room. So yeah, so Max essentially by the way, even I have seen this transition in Max over the last 10 years, where being purist about technology to be more compromising, where I think one of the key things Max says is, oh, Temporal is one big gigantic compromise. And you would not get this from Max 10 years ago. So yeah, but you can blame all the bad design decisions on me, but I really appreciate working with Max, where now Max actually listens to and the rationale on making those compromises. 10 years ago, he would not listen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, even just in the time that I've spent with you guys, the amount of progress and the transition that I've seen is astounding. So, and I think that's a testament to your character, both of you, but also I think to the, kind of effect that having a startup this, fast growth has on people. So it's very, very cool, very exciting. I actually think there's a question from Shannon that I really want to highlight because, as amazing as you are as people, I think that one of the reasons that's actually true is that you're very comfortable with failure and, having things not go right the first time. And so Shannon's question is, in the context of Jeremy, he says, I imagine it was a lot of effort. What's the mentality that you have to get through these type of bumps in your software engineering career when projects don't succeed?
I think it's a little bit different. Jeremy actually succeeded technically. Jeremy was actually a pretty good project. It ran over 60 use cases that Uber ran on it. And the only reason it didn't succeed was political. It has nothing with technology. And maybe we'll resurrect that project one day, because I think it was, and actually it was a pattern in my career, because until Cadence, what's happening, I started the project, I worked hard to deliver first version. I love doing design and initial implementation. We will put it in production, then move on. And usually this project stagnates. Just look where simple workflow is. And right now, and then the thing is that it happened like multiple times, and Cadence and Jeremy was one of those. Like we launched it, and then like I moved on, and like Samar also moved to other things, and then this time this project kind of stagnated to the point when it was not solvable, like at least as a project. It's still out there. It's open source. Maybe one day we can pick it up again. But Cadence, it was the first time I actually was about to leave the project. We launched the first version. It was like there. And like it was working and like was cool, but like, okay, it's interesting, but I'll move on. I almost like decided to move on. And then I'm like, okay, what happens if I stick? And because it was like picking up adoption and so on. And here you see the result. It's actually like I would say, Jeremy didn't fail technically. So I had my fun building it, but building that like to the point to like build business out of that, building it as a large project wasn't the goal. Now it is a goal, and I think because it's certainly like building another queue is not as exciting as building something like Temporal, which completely changes the way you think about your applications.
Yeah, so I think your answer, it's good, but it's also difficult, I think, for a lot of people to follow in practice. Basically, the mentality that you had is that, it was more about the thing that you were doing and less about the outcome of, what happened. And as long as you felt confident in the choices that you had made and that it was, the technically sound thing to do, the fact that, politics didn't let it actually succeed in like a broader sense, that wasn't really the point or the goal for you at that time.
Yeah, I think it's still like for me, the journey is more interesting. Like even right now, I think I enjoy what we're doing a lot, right? So I it's not like about, oh, let's reach this goal, right? Like it's more about, okay, well, what's the journey? And I really enjoy it.
Awesome. Samar, you have anything to add to that? And then I think we'll go.
Yeah, Jeremy, I have tons and tons of story from my Jeremy days. As I told Max, like it was an amazing journey, like building that Jeremy, starting a project from scratch, and like literally within 6 months, like getting enough traction in Uber. And I think that's the key ingredients, even as part of Temporal, like growing things organically, bottoms up. That is our core strength. That is why we see like in the last 2 years, starting the company from scratch with 3 people to now 45 people. But the only reason we are here is because of this community. And we love working with this community, essentially. Seeing like our last monthly town hall where I think Netflix presented. Today we have Stripe presenting. I know Datadog doing this amazing contribution on Temporal Light and all of that. Like, I think that is the thing which excites me the most at this point.
Very cool. So I think I'll wrap it up here since we're over time. There is one quick question, which is Adrian asked, how is Temporal planning to make money? Do you have a specific company model? The answer is it's all Temporal merch, like spinner toys and things like that, like LED. No, it's a cloud service. That's our only monetization route right now. And if you're interested in that, we have a sign up on our landing page. Awesome. Thank you everyone for coming. It was great.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone.
Yeah.
See you next month.
Yeah, thanks.
And we'll post it on YouTube.
Thanks, Ryland, and thanks.
Thank you. Happy 2 years.